Before we begin, I need you to forget everything you think you know about this story. Forget the flannel graphs. Forget the Easter eggs. Forget the sanitized Sunday school version where everything is soft and safe and distant. What actually happened on that Friday and on that Sunday was not soft. It was not safe. And it was anything but distant. This is the most consequential 72 hours in the history of the universe. And most people have never truly felt the weight of it. So tonight, we go back, all the way back, to the garden, to the trial, to the hill, to the tomb, and to the moment that split all of human history into before and after. Stay with me. Act 1. The night before. It begins in a garden. Not the kind with trimmed hedges and garden parties. The Garden of Gethsemane was a grove of ancient olive trees on the slope of the Mount of Olives. Twisted trunks, dark shadows, the smell of pressed olives in the air. Jesus has just finished the Last Supper with his disciples. He has washed their feet. He has broken bread and said, "This is my body, broken for you." He has poured wine and said, "This is my blood of the new covenant." And now he is alone. Well, almost alone. He has taken Peter, James, and John a little further into the garden, and he says something to them that stops time. He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." That is not poetic language. That is a medical description. Grief so acute it becomes physiologically dangerous, the kind of sorrow that can stop a human heart. And then he falls on his face. The Son of God, face in the dirt. And he prays, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." Now stop, because this is the moment most people rush past. This is God in human flesh, fully God and fully man, and he is asking if there is another way. He knows what is coming. He has known since before the world was made. And yet, in this moment, in this garden, the full weight of what he is about to carry lands on him like a physical force. And the Bible tells us something that should leave you breathless. Luke 22:44. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. Medical science has a name for this: hematidrosis. It is a real condition caused by extreme psychological stress where tiny blood vessels in the sweat glands rupture, mixing blood with sweat. Jesus was sweating blood in that garden. And then comes the line that defines everything. "Yet not my will, but yours." In that sentence, in that act of surrender in the dark, the rescue of the entire human race was secured. He didn't have to go, he chose to go. And while he is still praying, Judas arrives with torches and soldiers and the kiss, the most infamous act of betrayal in human history. A friend's lips on the cheek of the Son of God, used as a signal to arrest him. The disciples scatter. Peter follows at a distance, and Jesus, hands bound, is led away into the night. Act 2. The trials. What follows is a legal disgrace that the ancient world had never seen. Jesus goes through not one trial, not two, but 6 separate hearings in less than 12 hours. First, Annas, the former high priest, a powerful man who questions Jesus in the dark, hoping to find something. He finds nothing, but sends him on anyway. Then Caiaphas, the sitting high priest. The Sanhedrin is assembled, illegally, in the middle of the night, in the high priest's house. Jewish law required trials to happen during the day, in the temple courtyard, with proper procedures. None of that happens. They bring forward witnesses, but the witnesses contradict each other. Finally, Caiaphas stands and asks Jesus directly, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus says, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming on the clouds of heaven." The room explodes. Caiaphas tears his robes, the formal gesture of hearing blasphemy. They declare him worthy of death. And then the guards begin to beat him, to spit on him, to blindfold him and hit him and say, "Prophesy, who struck you?" Meanwhile, in the courtyard below, Peter is warming himself by a fire. 3 times he is asked if he knows Jesus. 3 times he says, "I do not know this man." And then the rooster crows. And Peter remembers. Jesus had told him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And the Bible says, Peter went outside and wept bitterly. That weeping is important. We'll come back to it. From Caiaphas, Jesus is taken to Pilate, the Roman governor, because the Jewish leaders do not have the authority to execute. Only Rome can do that. Pilate questions Jesus. He cannot find any basis for a charge. He sends him to Herod, the regional ruler of Galilee, who happens to be in Jerusalem for the Passover. Herod questions Jesus, who says nothing. Herod's soldiers mock him and dress him in a royal robe as a joke. Then he is sent back to Pilate. Pilate tries one more time to release him. He offers the crowd a choice, a Passover custom to release one prisoner. He puts Jesus against a violent insurrectionist named Barabbas. The crowd chooses Barabbas. And Pilate, in the most cowardly act in recorded history, washes his hands in front of the crowd, literally, washes his hands and says, "I am innocent of this man's blood." And then he orders the flogging. Act 4. The Way of the Cross. I need you to understand what a Roman flogging was. This was not a caning. This was not a whipping with a leather strap. A Roman flagellum was a short-handled whip with multiple leather cords. Embedded in those cords, pieces of bone, lead weights, metal hooks. The prisoner was stripped to the waist, bound to a post, and beaten, typically 39 lashes, across the back, the shoulders, the legs. The metal hooks would tear through skin, then muscle. Historical accounts describe the flogging going so deep that bones were sometimes exposed, internal organs sometimes visible through the wounds. By the time Jesus was handed to the soldiers after the flogging, there was no way to recognize him as a human being. Isaiah 52:14, written 700 years before this moment, says his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. 700 years before it happened, the prophet saw what the flogging would do. The soldiers are not finished. They press a crown of thorns on his head. Not a delicate halo of small thorns. The thorns of the plants available in that region could grow to be an inch or more in length, pressed deep into the scalp, which is one of the most vascular parts of the human body. They put a purple robe on him and mock him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They strike the crown of thorns with a staff, driving the thorns deeper. They spit on him. And then they make him carry the cross. Act 5. The Way of the Cross.
The crossbeam alone weighed between 75 and 100 pounds. And Jesus, after a sleepless night, after the emotional agony of Gethsemane, after the hematidrosis, after 6 trials, after the flogging, is given this beam to carry on his shredded back and shoulders through the streets of Jerusalem, up a hill called Golgotha. The word Golgotha in Aramaic means the place of the skull. He falls under the weight more than once. At some point, the soldiers pull a man from the crowd, a man named Simon of Cyrene, and compel him to carry the cross. That detail is not incidental. He did not volunteer. He was grabbed, pulled out of the crowd on his way into the city. And he carried the cross of Jesus. And I wonder, as he walked behind Jesus up that hill, what he felt, what he saw, what he understood. Following women wail along the road, Jesus turns to them, barely able to stand, bleeding from every surface, and says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children." Even on the way to his own death, he is concerned about others. The Crucifixion. Golgotha, a hill outside the city walls, elevated enough to be visible from the main roads into Jerusalem, because Rome crucified people publicly, deliberately, to be seen, to be a warning. The crossbeam is laid on the ground. Jesus is laid on it, and they drive the nails. Roman crucifixion nails were not small. They were iron spikes, approximately 5 to 7 inches long, a third of an inch wide. They were not driven through the palms. Modern medical research and archaeological evidence shows they were driven through the wrists, specifically through the space in the wrist called the carpo-metacarpal tunnel, which would have immediately compressed or severed the median nerve, causing an indescribable burning pain that shot up both arms. The feet were nailed through the bones, one foot crossed over the other, a single nail through both. The crossbeam is lifted, dropped into the vertical post with a lurch that would have dislocated both shoulders, and Jesus hangs. Crucifixion kills by asphyxiation. The position of the body makes it nearly impossible to exhale. To breathe, to take even a partial breath, the victim has to push up on the nails through the feet, flexing the knees. Every breath is an act of will, an act of agony. This could go on for hours or days. And from the cross, Jesus speaks. His first words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Not a curse, not a cry for rescue, forgiveness for the men driving the nails. 2 criminals are crucified on either side of him. One mocks him, "Save yourself and us." The other rebukes the first and then turns to Jesus and says, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus says to him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." No religious journey required, no penance, no reformation, just a dying man turning his face toward the Son of God in his final hour. And the response is immediate. Today. Jesus sees his mother in the crowd. He looks at John, the disciple he loved, and says, "Woman, here is your son. John, here is your mother." Broken, barely breathing, dying, and still making sure his mother is cared for. At noon, something happens that has no natural explanation. Darkness. From noon to 3 in the afternoon, 3 hours, the sky goes dark over all the land. No eclipse accounts for 3 hours of darkness. No natural phenomenon explains it.
And at 3 o'clock, after 3 hours of darkness, Jesus cries out in a voice loud enough to be heard across the hill, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me? This is not a cry of despair. This is the opening line of Psalm 22, a psalm David wrote 1,000 years earlier, a psalm that describes exactly what is happening on this hill in precise detail. The hands and feet pierced, the bones out of joint, the mockers circling. Jesus is quoting scripture from the cross, announcing this is the fulfillment. And then he says, "I am thirsty." A soldier soaks a sponge in sour wine and lifts it to his lips on a stalk of hyssop. Hyssop, the same plant used to apply the blood of the Passover lamb to the doorposts of the houses in Egypt, the night death passed over. The Lamb of God, drinking from hyssop on Passover. Nothing in this story is accidental. And then, the final words. It is finished. In Greek, tetelestai. A single word, but in the ancient world, this word was stamped on debt certificates when a debt had been paid in full. When you owed something and it was cancelled, tetelestai was written across it. Paid in full, nothing owed. Jesus bows his head and he gives up his spirit. And the earth shakes, the rocks split, the curtain in the temple, a massive 60-foot-tall curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, tears in two, from top down. Not from the bottom up, as if a man had torn it, from the top down. The separation between God and humanity torn open by God himself. A Roman soldier standing at the foot of the cross, a pagan, a professional executioner, watches all of this. The darkness, the earthquake, the way Jesus died. And he says, "Surely this man was the Son of God." The first confession of faith at the cross from a Roman soldier. Act 6. The Tomb. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the Sanhedrin who had secretly believed, goes to Pilate and asks for the body. Jesus is taken down, wrapped in linen with burial spices, placed in a new tomb carved from rock. A great stone is rolled across the entrance. The chief priests and Pharisees go to Pilate and say, "Seal the tomb. This deceiver said he would rise in 3 days. Make it secure so his disciples cannot steal the body and claim he rose." Pilate gives them a guard of soldiers. The tomb is sealed with the official Roman seal. And the world goes quiet. Saturday, the Sabbath, the longest day in the history of faith. The disciples are in hiding. Peter is somewhere weeping. Mary Magdalene is planning to return to the tomb at dawn. And the tomb is silent. The Resurrection. Sunday, before dawn, Mary Magdalene and several other women gather spices and walk to the tomb in the dark. And as they walked, they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away for us?" It was a practical question. The stone was enormous. They cannot move it alone. But when they arrived, the stone was already rolled away. An angel sits on it. His appearance was like lightning. His clothes were white as snow. The guards had fainted from fear. And the angel says, "Do not be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. He is not here." 3 words, the most world-altering 3 words ever spoken over an empty room. Mary runs.
She finds Peter and John. Peter runs. John runs faster. John arrives first, stops at the entrance, looks in, sees the linen wrappings lying there, goes no further. Then Peter arrives and goes straight in. The linen wrappings, the burial cloths lying there, and the cloth that had been around Jesus' head, not lying with the other cloths, folded, placed separately. A folded napkin in Jewish culture, in the context of a meal, was a signal from the master of the house that he was not finished, that he was coming back. The disciples see, and they begin to believe. But Mary stays. She stands outside the tomb weeping. She looks inside and sees two angels, one at the head, one at the foot of where the body had lain. They ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She says, "Because they have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." And then she turns to him, and there is a man standing there. She doesn't recognize him. Through her tears, in the morning light, she assumes he must be the gardener. He asks, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" And she says, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And then he says her name, Mary. One word, and she knows.
And she knows. She turns to him and cries out, "Rabboni, teacher!" And the risen Christ stands in a garden in the early morning light, and the first person he appears to is not a king, not a priest, not a general, or a philosopher, or a theologian. It is a woman who had been delivered from 7 demons, who had stood at the foot of the cross when everyone else had run, who came back to the tomb before sunrise because she could not stay away. To her, he says her name first, and he sends her. "Go and tell my brothers." The first witness of the resurrection, the first commissioned messenger of the risen Christ, Mary Magdalene. Epilogue. What it means. So what do we do with all of this? Because this is not mythology. This is not allegory. This is not a metaphor for springtime or renewal or the human spirit's resilience. The disciples didn't die for a symbol. They didn't scatter to every corner of the known world and endure imprisonment and beatings and execution for a story they invented. They died claiming they had seen him alive after the cross. Something happened in that tomb. Something that turned terrified, hiding disciples into men and women who could not be silenced. Something that turned Peter, who wept in a courtyard after denying Jesus 3 times, into the man who stood up 50 days later in Jerusalem and preached to thousands that Jesus of Nazareth had been raised from the dead. And those thousands believed him. The resurrection is not the happy ending of a sad story. It is the declaration that death itself has been defeated, not just for Jesus, for everyone who comes to him. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." That is not a promise about an afterlife, somewhere in the vague future. That is a statement about right now. The tomb is empty. The stone is rolled away. And the risen Christ is still saying names. He is saying yours. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs it this Easter. Hit that like button. Subscribe because we are just getting started.
and drop a comment. What moment of this story hit you the hardest? Tell me. I'll see you next week.